Hi there, my name is Jessica Jones. I am a psych major here at George Mason, and I did a little research on the effect of an absent father on male identity. So a lot of the research I looked into talks about the characteristics and the traits about the characteristics and traits of males who grew up without a father or their father left at some point during their childhood, and these characteristics are compared to those of males who were father present, so to speak, throughout their entire childhood. I guess single parent households are very, very common in today's society, especially in the US. And many of these households are mother headed as opposed to father headed. So that implies that the father is not present in many of these cases. And this creates many issues when it comes to the development of a male sex role. Um, and so we'll be talking a little bit about that today. Some of the forms in which these issues may come about are developmental. It goes so far as to being hormonal. It affects the self-esteem and emotions. It also affects aggression. There'll be two types we'll talk about, and it also has other influences that are indirect that we'll be talking about in regards to like socioeconomic status and things like that. So we know that father absent households have become very prevalent in today's society. And one of the ways that this really affects development is there was research done that showed that if a male child lost his father between the ages of 0 and 2, when the psychosocial stage of trust versus mistrust was being developed, it really affected the child's ability to cope with the psychosocial stages that come after that, because according to Erik Erikson, the psychosocial stages really build one on top of the other, and this can't happen if the first one, the basic trust versus mistrust, cannot be established. So there's also a study that was done on African American adolescent boys, in which the general trend suggested that boys who were not primarily raised with their fathers were more passive and exhibited more feminine and fewer masculine traits, such as rough and competitive play, than father-present boys did, which, this rough and competitive play is really a distinctive characteristic between the ways that that boys develop socially as they play with one another, and girls develop socially as they are children, and they're just learning how to socialize with one another. Further research states that that a father provides an example of masculine identity. So without that example, it is really difficult for a male child to learn how to be masculine. And kids also identify best with their same gender parents, so girls with their moms and boys with their fathers. So it is very ideal, again, for a child's father to be around. In a study that observed boys who had become father absent before the age of 5, some after the age of 5, and some were consistently father present, they were rating themselves on how masculine they were, and actually the boys who became father present the earliest in life, so between the ages of became father absent earlier in life, between the ages of 0 and 5, actually rated themselves the least masculine out of these three groups. They weren't comparing themselves, but when we compared, or when the researchers compared them. So this goes as far as affecting hormone levels. There's a study done in a Caribbean society, and they tested the testosterone levels of men who grew up with their fathers and men who grew up without their fathers. Now we know that both men and women possess testosterone and estrogen, but you know, women's estrogen levels are higher and men's testosterone levels are higher. And we see this in the way that men and women behave, and boys and girls. So this test showed that men who grew up without a father actually possess less testosterone than the men who grew up with a father. And this comes into play in simple physical traits, even just such as body hair and voice, the deepening of the voice, things that happen during puberty. So that was a really huge finding as well. So we know that father absence affects boys' self-esteem and emotions, and this is really the base for a person's identity is the self-esteem, especially for a male with the more dominating characteristics that they have. So we learned that self-esteem is actually positively correlated with masculinity. There's a study done of African American boys who were father absent and father present African American boys. The father absent African American boys actually portrayed significantly lower levels of self-esteem than the father present boys did. So even if a boy's father doesn't live with him, it is really imperative that he spends time with the child and develops a relationship with him outside of the home, even just to establish those emotions and that self-esteem, so that the child can continue to develop his masculine identity as he would if the father were living at home with him. So there are two types of aggression we're going to talk about. There's more of a necessary, needed type of aggression to contribute to this masculine role that, we kind of perceive a masculine identity as a little more aggressive than a women's a feminine identity. And then there's there's a type of aggression that is a little more hostile. It's violent, can include homicide, sadly, and so we're going to get into that. So the more necessary aggression, there was actually a study that showed that African American and European American boys whose fathers were not living with them by the age of 5 were actually less aggressive and participated less in physical contact activities than those boys who were father present. And we see this in play. Girls play with their dolls and they want to play house and or get their nails done or whatever it is, and the boys tend to be more physical contact. They really they like playing games that are a little more intense and horseplay and things like that. And so the study showed that the boys who were father absent between the ages of 0 and 5 really did not show these characteristics. So moving along to the negative aggression, there's actually a study done that showed that a high indicator of homicide for boys and men was actually if the father did not sleep near the child as an infant. So if the father didn't sleep in the same bed, in the same room, or in the same building even as the child when the child was an infant, that child was more likely to commit homicide later in life. And the reasoning for this is kind of that it's assumed that if the father sleeps near the child, he takes care of the child, whereas if the father doesn't sleep near the child, he doesn't have much of a role in the child's life, especially as the child is developing, which is really key to what we're talking about here. So similarly, there's a study that showed that children who don't have a parent, who, whether it's both or one, they try to make up for it in other areas, and so often these areas are sadly aggression in such ways that that include violent behavior and even homicide. So it really is key, and even just a sociological perspective that boys do have their father, have both parents around. So we know that having the absence of a father can actually affect a child indirectly. One of these ways is through socioeconomic status. And when one parent is missing, particularly a father who tends to be the breadwinner and bring home all the money, at least in a traditional family, um, there's only one income coming in, and it's the mother's income, and this can create just lack of attention and lack of ability to do things. These families often live in low socioeconomic status neighborhoods, which don't always give them good role models to look up to. They have their mom, but then there's also neighbors in the neighborhood who may not be always adequate role models. They may, be violent or do drugs or whatever it may be, and the child may not know that that's not good behavior. Um, in the same way, kids in low SES families actually aren't able to do the same types of extracurricular activities as many of their peers because their families can't afford it, and so they see that, and their self-esteem is lowered because they realize that they cannot participate in the same activities as their peers and as their friends. And so again, the self-esteem is really key to an identity. So that's really, really damaging. So we've been talking a lot about all of the things that are issues because of father absence, but I do want you to know there is a little bit of hope. It is preferable that a father is present, that both parents are present, but a mother can make up for, in a way, in some way, can make up for this father absence. There was a father absence study done that suggested that the critical factor influencing father absent boy's sex role was the relationship with the mother. So if the child had a good relationship with his mother, it was more likely that his sex role was developed more adequately, because his mother can encourage these types of behaviors. In the same way, if a mother can create more of the same dynamic in the household that would have been there if the father were present as well, that can really help. This would, of course, be extremely difficult while the mother is, bringing the only income into the house and trying to spend time with her kids and so on and so forth. If when she's spending time with her kids, she can create that family dynamic, that can really help as well, to bring that encouragement and that approval and things that the father would bring in. So we've learned that father absence can really take a toll on its victims, so to speak, on boys who grow up without a father, and it can really be damaging to the development of their sex role. But we do know that the mother can make up for this in some way. It is definitely preferable that both parents are present in a child's life, and research will continue to be done on this topic, but nothing will actually be done about it until parents actually realize that it is essential to have both parents around, and when that's not an option, that there are other options that can help. So thank you very much.